Please say your name and spell your first and last name.
Chic Dambach, Charles Chic Dambach, CHICDAMBACH.
Okay. Thank you, and I'll refer to you as Chick if that's all right.
That's what I want.
Okay. And I'm David Peters. It's September 15th. We're recording here at Edmund Lowe Library in the University Archives Department, the Angie DeBow room. So I've got a few questions for you, Chick, and we'll just get started. So if you wouldn't mind, where did you grow up?
Grew up in Ohio, just north of Columbus, a town called Worthington. It's a lovely community. Went to Worthington High School, graduated in 1962.
Okay. Is there anything else about your background you'd like to share with us? Your family or
My father was a professor at Ohio State University, and I like to think that I came to the better OSU. And I have a lot of friends from high school who all went to Ohio State, and I always poke them and say, I went to the better OSU, and they can't stand it, but I did.
Okay. Any siblings or?
Brother and sister went to Ohio State like everybody else in the family.
So everyone went to OSU?
Everyone went to OSU, but I went to the better OSU.
Okay, great. Why did you come to this OSU?
Well, for the worst of all possible reasons, I came to play football. I was pretty good in high school, thought I was pretty good anyway, and the coaches at a lot of places thought I was pretty good, and so I was offered scholarships to a lot of places, including Ohio State. Woody Hayes offered me a scholarship, turned that one down and came here. Play football. It turned out to be a very unpleasant experience, which I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. But and to be totally honest, when you're being recruited back then, it's probably still the case now, they'd set you up with a date with a student. And of all the places that I got recruited, the best date of all was here, and so I had to come here.
Who do you remember who the coach was?
Oh yes. The coach who recruited me was Cliff Spiegel, and I liked him a lot, but he was fired at the end of my freshman year, and they brought in a new coaching staff, headed up by Phil Cutchin, and it was awful.
It was awful.
Just awful.
Did you play past your freshman year? I mean, you couldn't play your freshman year at that time,
Couldn't play, that's right. We played freshman ball. We had an incredible coach our freshman year, Sammy Ball. The great Sammy Ball, one of the greatest football players of all time, just happened to be friends with Cliff Spiegel, happened to be available, and he came. It was the only year he was here, and it was my freshman year, and I got to play under the tutelage of the great Sammy Ball. That was phenomenal, just phenomenal.
What position did you play?
Believe it or not, I was a lineman. Weighed about 210, 220, and back then you could do it. It was small, but you could still do it. Today I need another 80 pounds to be able to play.
Offense and defense?
Pulling guard on offense.
Pulling guard. Which, left or right?
Left.
Left guard.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. So Cliff Spiegel recruits you.
Cliff Spiegel, good guy. We won some games, lost some games, and it was a good experience. The coach they brought in, Phil Cutchin, they wanted to beat Oklahoma in the worst way. Phil Cutchin had been an assistant to Bear Bryant, and if you know anything about Bear Bryant, you know he was one tough coach. Phil Cutchin was determined to be tougher than Bear Bryant, and he was. And the practices were so incredibly awful that the first spring he was here, which was the spring of 1963, we had over 100 scholarship players. By the end of spring training, we were down to about 45. Everybody else quit, gave up their full scholarships because it was so awful, the brutality of the coaches. We came back the next fall, and we were down to about 35 or 40. By the end of the season, we were down to almost 30 people on the entire teams. We go to play Oklahoma, the big end of season rivalry. We got 30 players on the entire team. You need 22 just to have an offense and defense. We lost the game. And if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and share.
Please share some more of your experience.
Something that's really illustrative of how awful it was. I had become friends with a guy named Earl Jones our freshman year. And Earl's African American, and there wasn't very much social interaction between the black and white players then. But Earl and I had become good friends. Come our junior year, both of us got hurt. I got hurt my fifth shoulder separation. They finally let me get out of the program. But Earl had a devastating knee injury, couldn't play anymore. The rule was if you got hurt, they had to keep you on scholarship until your graduation day. And it was fine. I was a white guy. That was okay. Earl was black. He couldn't play anymore, and they wanted to force him to quit. And they set up, and I'll never forget this. It was a transformative experience in my life. They set up the defensive line. We were getting ready to play Tulsa, who had a fabulous quarterback and passing game. So for the defensive line to practice rushing the passer, they had Earl, who couldn't run, couldn't do anything, banged up knee, stand where the quarterback would stand for just a drop back pass, which is what the Tulsa quarterback did. And the instructions to the defensive line was to hit the quarterback, Earl Jones, as hard as they could on his knee, on his bad knee. And the whistle wouldn't blow to stop play until everyone on the defensive line had hit him as hard as they could on his knee. The first play, nobody did it, of course. They went and hit him gently. And the coach, Jim Stanley, went up to every one of them, grabbed them by the face mask, ripped their helmets on, whacked them on their own head with their own helmet. Said, I said hit him in the knee. You hit that nigger in the knee. After a while, out of self-defense, they had to do it. And this went on play after play after play after play. And the coach would say, when are you going to quit, nigger? When are you going to quit? And he wouldn't quit. And he finally couldn't stand. He was on his knees. You going to quit? No. Run it again. Do it again. Hit him again. Finally, he was laying on the ground, couldn't get up. When are you going to quit? He wouldn't quit. And finally, Phil Cutchin, who watched the practices from a tower, came down from his tower and just came over just angry as he could be. He just said, get out of here, nigger. And Earl crawled off the field. And that was the last I saw of Earl Jones for 40 years. And I felt so guilty that I did nothing to help my friend. Back in the dorm that night, I was saying, how could this be? How could they do this? And how could I do nothing to help my friend? And that's when I started to become an activist, saying, never again will I stand on the sidelines. Pardon me, but I get emotional about this.
That is quite all right.
By the way, Earl and I reconnected 40 years later. I was writing my memoir. I wrote that story, wondering where he was, and I got an email from Earl Jones. Just incredible. Mm-hmm. And I picked up the phone, called him with tears in my eyes. I said, Earl, you won't believe this. I just finished writing up your story. He said, do you mind if I send it to you to get you to validate that I got it right? He said, by all means. So I sent it to him. He said, yeah, you got it right. That's what happened. But I also said, I hope I didn't bring back bad memories that you would rather get away from. He said, I've never been able to get away from those memories. He said, but because of what you did, what you wrote, I've now crossed over from the dark side and I can sleep at night.
Thank you.
So Earl and I then renewed our friendship. We're very close. Just this spring, he passed away. And I had the honor of organizing and making his funeral arrangements possible. I miss him. Pardon me.
No, that's quite all right. I'm so appreciative for you telling the story, and I'm glad you had the opportunity to reconnect with him after that to kind of resolve some of those feelings. Yeah. So, thank you. Okay. All right. Wonderful. All right. So you came to OSU on a football scholarship. Yep. You played football then through your junior year?
Yes, though there's a little wrinkle in that too.
Okay.
I was hurt badly my freshman year. My dad insisted that I quit. He said, you're going to have permanent damage if you keep playing. So I dropped out for a year, went to a different school, went to Ohio Wesleyan. I was determined to come back. I was going to make that football team. I was going to do it. Mm-hmm. So I came back. Had to re-earn my scholarship. The coach said, you're welcome to put on the pads, but you're going to have to show us that you're worthy of a scholarship. And after several weeks of practice, the coaches came up and said, you're pretty good. You got your scholarship. So I came back and played again. But then was what would have been normally my junior year. Got my 5th shoulder separation, and Doc Cooper was famous here, of course. Doc Cooper kind of came up and said, no more, you can't keep this up. So that was the end of it. Okay. So then I had time on my hands. Football practice takes a lot of time. So I had time on my hands. I thought, what am I going to do now? I started reading books. I started studying. Do you know that books have a lot of information and knowledge in them? I had no idea.
I've heard that rumor.
So I did the minimum to get by, but all at once discovered books and how wonderful they are. And then I went from a barely passing C student to a straight A student, and several things were happening. Part of it was what had happened to Earl. Recognized the civil rights movement, and I needed to do something about that. And I got involved with the debate team and with the speakers series. Became chairman of the forum committee that brought speakers to campus. And as you probably know, there were some real issues with that.
And
back
we'll
then.
start
The whole
talking about
academic
that.
freedom and so on, and so that got me involved with that. And then, of course, the war in Vietnam was building up, and because of the debate program, I studied about Vietnam, and we developed a case built around the war in Vietnam because an obscure senator from South Dakota spoke at the conference of all the debate teams in the country come together before the season to look at the issue. The issue was resolved the United States should reduce its foreign policy commitments. And everybody's looking at foreign aid, and economic aid to people all over the place. And George McGovern, this unknown senator from South Dakota, had been a national debate champion, and he was there as a speaker. And nobody's paying any attention to him. I got to have lunch with him. And he said, look into Vietnam. Look into Vietnam. It is a colossal mistake. The premise for it is totally wrong. It is a colossal mistake. Do your research, build a case around it. We did our research, and I went from being a hawk, ready to go fight and kill the communists, to being a total anti-war advocate. And I thought, I got to do more than just make this a debate case. I've got to do something about this. This is wrong. Wrong. We got to do something about it.
So you arrive here in the fall of '62?
Yes.
And so the time period we're talking about is '62 to 60.
I finished '67.
Okay.
Yeah. I managed to squeeze my 4-year education into 5.
Into 5?
Yeah.
Okay.
For a number of reasons, but I.
But you did briefly go to
I'm
Ohio
glad-
Wesleyan and
just
then came
for that
back.
for that 1 year, and that's part of it. I lost some credits by doing that, but I'm glad I did, because '67 was the year when the activist community really started coming together and doing things. There was some of it going on, but it was '67 that we really came into our own, and I was still here. I got to be part of it.
But your epiphany was about '65 or '66.
Yeah.
When
When Earl went through his dreadful experience.
right.
Yeah.
Did you ever come to this library building?
Every now and then. Before 1965, rarely.
Rarely.
After 65, almost every day, because I literally set out to read it outside of classroom assignments. I read it at a minimum of 1 book a week to catch up on all the stuff I missed out on all those years.
What was your major?
I was a speech communications major. And the reason for that was that the first A I ever got in a college course was in a speech course. Okay, I'll major in speech. Not thinking about what it was all about, what it would mean. It turned out to be the best decision I ever made. In large part because of a man named Dale Stockton. And I don't know if you've heard anything about Dale Stockton.
Please share.
But Dale Stockton was an incredible force in my life and many, many other students here. He came to teach speech, which you just kind of think, okay, speech, big deal. Dale was absolutely brilliant. He was a moral authority, and he taught us life lessons. And I'll tell you the thing that he taught me that enabled me to do some pretty significant things on the world stage in terms of making the world more peaceful. Helped end 2 wars in Africa because of what Dale Stockton taught me. And he taught me to listen. And I thought when I took a speech course, you're going to learn how to talk and how to convince other people that you're right. And Dale said, no. Speaking begins with listening. If you can't listen to and understand other people, you can't give a worthwhile speech. Oh! and Dale would bring people together in his home. He had kind of picked out about 8 or 10 students he thought were really outstanding, and they really were, with exception being me, but really, really good students. And he was our Socrates. We would meet at his house, usually at about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, stay up until midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, and he would pose questions, moral questions, intellectual questions, challenging questions. And we would think them through, we would talk them through, and no answer was ever good enough. He'd always challenge us to go deeper, think more critically. And this was 2, 3, 4 nights a week. And that's where I really got my education. Now, I ended up doing pretty well in the rest of the classes as well. But Dale did that for us. He was amazing. And I went into the Peace Corps in 1967, graduated in 67, went into the Peace Corps, was determined to come back and get my graduate degree with Dale. And I literally moved into his garage to be that close to him, to learn as much as I could from this phenomenal human being. By the way, he was the debate coach, and he took the debate program from mediocre to being national class. We were in the top 10 of the country because Dale was the coach. So I came back to get a master's degree under Dale Stockton, and we had even planned our careers together. In the spring of 1969, I came back in 1969, spring of 1970, he was murdered in Dallas. And it was just devastating for me and for all those of us who were close to him. And with that, I wasn't able to finish my graduate degree. What's the point? Dale's not here anymore. So they asked me to teach his courses through the end of the semester, which I did. Did a lousy job of it, but did the best I could. And then moved on. I just couldn't continue with Dale gone.
Do you remember the names of some of the other students
Oh, yes.
together?
Absolutely. In fact, one of them is very well known here, Leonard Court, who was president of the Alumni Association for many years and very, very active in OSU support things. Leonard was on the debate team and kind of one of the superstars on the debate team, went on to Harvard Law School, now practices law in Oklahoma City. Another guy you ought to talk to.
Okay.
Leonard is wonderful. Totally devoted to Oklahoma State. Drives an orange car, all that stuff.
All right.
But a brilliant man, very close to Dale, and very significant on that debate team.
Okay. Are there others from that group? Do you remember?
Yes. Leland McKinnon was on that team, and I've stayed a little bit in touch with Leland. And a guy named Jim Gilchrist. And part of and Jim is now provost at Western Michigan University. He may have retired just recently, but I'm staying a little bit of touch with Jim. But he is the twin brother of a guy named Coleman. And I don't know if you've heard anything about Coleman yet.
No.
Here's another one you need to look into. Except Coleman never went to Oklahoma State. Jim did. They were twin brothers. But Coleman became a major figure nationally in the anti-war movement, was sentenced to prison for avoiding the draft, resisting the draft, close to the Berrigan brothers. Major figure in the nationwide anti-war movement. His twin brother Jim was on the debate team. And it's not that they had a falling out, but they just followed different paths. But Jim was a great guy and a very significant academic career, again, at Western Michigan. So those are some of them. And Janet Weathers, grown up here in Stillwater, was on the debate team. And she ended up, and I don't know if she's actually at the theological seminary, but she teaches theology at Princeton. I think she's retired now as well, but also a brilliant young lady. We were really good friends back then, and very, very much a part of this whole experience with Dale Stockton.
Were there other faculty members that had an impact on your time here?
Yeah, several did. Judd Milburn taught English. He opened my eyes to an awful lot of things. I took his course, and I took his course before I had gone through the Epiphany. And didn't totally catch on to it, but I just kind of had the sense that there's something here that I'm not fully grasping. And then after I had my epiphany and started getting involved, he and I reconnected. So I was no longer taking his course, but we became good friends. He, along with Dale Stockton, helped me with my out-of-classroom education. There's a musician, and it'll come to me in just a second. I apologize.
Covey?
At our age, we're allowed to forget these things.
Was it Cyclone Covey?
Well, Cyclone Covey was another one.
Okay.
He was not the musician that
Okay.
I have in mind. Victor Wolfram is the musician.
Victor Wolfram, okay.
And Victor and his wife Esta and I became very good friends. He would invite me over to his house before he was going on a concert tour. He had a few of us come over so he could practice his music, and we listened to him, give him our feedback. I became quite devoted to music as well along the way, and Victor and Esta were wonderful friends. Live out in California, so they were also influential. Milburn and Cyclone Covey, and part of the Cyclone Covey is that I did my graduate work at Wake Forest, and he of course also went to Wake Forest with Dr. Scales. And the other one I have to mention is the Dean James Ralph Scales. And I don't know if you've heard anything yet about him.
I've heard some, but please.
He's worth a whole book. Dr. Scales came here, and my background with him is a very fun story. He came here from Oklahoma Baptist University. Would have been about 1965, 66. And a lot of us who were on the progressive side, a little bit concerned, Dean of Arts and Sciences coming from OBU, are we sure that's really what we want for the, if it's business school, fine, but arts and sciences, that should be the progressive movement. So we were a little bit nervous about this guy, and I was teaching as a graduate. I hadn't graduated yet, but they gave me a teaching assistant position anyway. So I went to this faculty meeting, and he gave a speech in which he said, because this was when turmoil was all abounding, and so he wanted to comment on that, and he said, I don't want the boat rocked because I'm in it. Well, here I was out there, this young firebrand said, that's just totally wrong. So a guy named Bill Dawson and I went back and we wrote a letter to the editor of the OOHRP. We blasted him. And sure enough, within an hour of that paper hitting the offices, my phone rang. It was the dean's
Dr.
office.
Scales.
The dean would like to see you now. Okay. And of course, we were kind of proud of our resistance, and so I proudly walked over there, ready for whatever he was going to say, and walked in, and he said, good letter, very well written. I said, but you totally missed the point. That was satire. It was satire. I want to rock the boat. The boat needs to be rocked. I said, let's work together to make that happen. You got to be kidding. The dean wants to work with us, the student activist movement. The next day, and I had a little office as a graduate teaching assistant. They gave me a little office. The next day I walked in, and there was a handwritten note on my desk from Dr. Scales saying, now that we've met, don't neglect me. And I didn't. And so as we were going through the student activist stuff, I stayed in close touch with him, and he would advise me on how far we could push without getting into too much trouble. So he became our confidant within the administration. And one of the great honors of my life was a year later, he was being considered for president of Wake Forest University. And the trustees from Wake Forest came to Stillwater, and they wanted 4 people to recommend him. They wanted a faculty member, they wanted somebody from the administration, somebody from the community, and a student. I was the student. And I was just so deeply honored. But then I also thought, this is Wake Forest. This is pardon me, but a Southern Baptist school in North Carolina. Are you kidding me? If I tell him the truth, there's no way he's going to get the job. So, but the trustees came into my little cubicle of an office there, and they said, Wake Forest has to change. It's got to catch up with the times. Can Dr. Scales do that? And given what I just been through with him, I said, you're darn right. And I told them the story, and they hired him. And he became a great president. He took that from being a sleepy old do-nothing school to an intellectual academic powerhouse. And that was Dr. Scales.
Yeah. He served here as dean only a short period of time.
And
he had come in to replace Com, who had been the dean.
That's exactly right.
Who moved up into the presidency.
That's right.
And so then Scales,
Yep.
which is a different perspective on deanship than
Yep.
perhaps Com had had.
Absolutely.
So okay.
Absolutely.
All
Yep.
right.
Yep.
Okay.
I hope I'm not being too candid.
No, you feel be as candid as you feel comfortable.
Right. This is the story as I remember it. Others have different memories, but that's my memory of it. And it's pretty intense memories because these were intense times.
All right, so tell us about some of your other on and off campus activities during your time here. Organizations you were part of, you mentioned some of these. Were there things you were doing in the community as well as the campus?
A little bit in the community with regard to race relations. We kind of started working with the high school and the black and white students. We created something that we call the Black and White Society, that would bring together black and white students, just kind of talk through some of the issues and what they were dealing with, both from the black student perspective and the white student perspective.
And this is still during your undergraduate
Yeah.
time, so now we're into 65, 66.
Yeah.
Okay.
So during that time, and then when it went to the Peace Corps and came back, we got reactivated that group, so we did it again. Well, I wasn't involved in a whole lot of formal organizations, but I was chairman of the forum committee that brought speakers to campus, and that was pretty intense unto itself. It took a lot of time and effort. And there, part of what we wanted to do was challenge the old establishment rules and the restrictions they had on the kind of speakers you could bring. And we pulled off one could call it a stunt, but I'm awfully proud of it. Every now and then we would propose speakers, and I'd meet with Dr. Com, and he would say no, and walk out and say okay. But it was a phenomenal speaker series. We brought Barry Goldwater to get a strong conservative. We brought Hubert Humphrey, and even though we were very strong anti-war, Humphrey, of course, was defending the war. But we brought the Vice President of the United States. This is a student speaker organization. We brought the Vice President of the United States to this campus. We brought the candidate for president, Barry Goldwater, to this campus. We also brought Henry Steele Commager, who had been a significant anti-war activist and intellectual leader. Julian Bond, who you'll remember, one of the great leaders of the civil rights movement. We brought Julian Bond here. But the coup was Dr. Han Soo-yin. Dr. Han Soo-yin is the author of a romance novel called A Many Splendored Thing. It had been made into a movie and a very popular song. And when I told Dr. Com we were going to bring Dr. Han Soo-yin, he said, finally, Chick's going to bring somebody, that's safe, this is good. Somehow it slipped my mind that she was a close friend of and confidant of Mao Zedong. Now, I don't know why I didn't remember to tell him that, but I didn't. So he said, fine, and so as we promoted, all we said was this romance novelist, but we let it slip, of course, intentionally. We just said word of mouth, don't miss this. This is big. And people kind of saying, why? I say, come and see. So it was at the Student Union Theater, and it was jam-packed, standing room only. And the only reference to A Many Splendored Thing was in my introduction of Dr. Han Soo-yin. And she went right into the Chinese Communist Party line all the way through, and it was quite an experience. But she said something there that to me was transforming. And not that I agreed with her, I happen to think Mao Zedong was one of the worst human beings in the history of all of humanity. What he did to the people of China, the mass murders, this mass starvation is worse than Hitler, worse than Stalin. This guy was absolutely awful, and I would in no way endorse him, but it was important for us to hear from that side of the world and that perspective. And what Dr. Han Soo-yin said to our audience was, he said, I know you're concerned about what's going on in China. We okay?
Yeah, we're fine.
I know you're concerned about what's going on in China. So she said, please understand. We look out on our border, and we look at Vietnam, tiny country of totally inconsequential on the world stage. And you have 400,000 soldiers. You invaded South Vietnam with 400,000 soldiers. Why would you do that if not to prepare to invade China? You got 50,000 troops in Cambodia, another 50,000 in Thailand, right on our border. Why would you be doing that if not to prepare to invade our country? Had thought about it that way. And then she said, you think we're dangerous? When you had the possibility of a few missiles on an island 90 miles off your coast, you were prepared to launch a nuclear holocaust that would destroy all life on this planet. And you think we're a threat? Whoa! I just rocked back in my chair. Oh my God! I had never looked at the world that way. And the difference that made in my life, in my ability to help negotiate peace treaties, was being willing to listen to, respect, and understand people with whom I may totally disagree. I became friends with a man who is known as the most hated man in all of Africa. And I got to know him because I was willing to listen to him and respect him and understand him and help get him to take a different path. Because of what I learned on this campus and because we brought in a speaker that we were not supposed to bring. So there.
Who was the African leader? Are you willing to share that or not?
Sure. His name is Asarius Ruberwa, head of the RCD, the rebel group in the Congo. Backed by Rwanda, and they carried out, as you may know, a brutal civil war in the Congo, trying to overthrow the Kabila government. But I got to know Rubero very well. We became friends. We're still friends, and helped them, his rebel group and the MLC, the Ugandan-backed rebel group, come together with the Kabila government and agree to form a coalition government. We just did that. It's a couple of Peace Corps guys. We got them together. And because we were willing to respect and listen to them, nobody else would. Everybody else, certainly in the U.S. government, would not talk with them. You know, they're terrible people. You know, they've got to be eliminated. They have to be destroyed. So let's find out why they're doing what they're doing. Showed them some respect. Listened to them, and they were willing to totally change their course. And Rivera, he still comes to the U.S. We get together for breakfast, lunch, or dinner whenever he's here, and every time he stops, he says, "You know, Chick, this whole process that ended the civil war in the Congo, it all began with you and your group."
And your willingness to listen.
And because we were willing to show him respect and listen to him, that changed everything.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right. Yeah.
All right. So, how did you get involved with the drummer? Did you have a role with the publication at all?
I did. In fact, the article on Volume 1, Number 1, there's a front page story that I wrote about Barry Goldwater because we brought him as a speaker, and I was complimentary to Goldwater as a person. You know, indicating a strong difference on the war and most other policies, but found him to be a very intelligent, articulate, and genuine human being. And so I wrote how much I enjoyed and appreciated the fact that while we had totally different opinions, he wanted to hear from me and from our group. He was curious about why we were so adamant in our opposition to the war. Genuinely interested in that, and I wrote about that and said, you know, I really appreciate the fact that this man, you know, a former candidate for president, a U.S. senator, cared about our position, respected us in our position, didn't change his mind, but he respected us, and I wanted to acknowledge that and did it. So, and I wrote several articles for the drummer. I forget what my title was. I had some sort of title with the paper, and so did it.
So why was there a drummer? Why didn't you do that in the Ocali
that particular article would have been acceptable in the Ocali. Most of what we put in the drummer, most of the other stuff I wrote for the drummer would not be acceptable in the Ocali. And you know, there were what were called underground newspapers all across the country at that time. By God, we were going to have our underground newspaper right here and do it. So we did, and we had so much fun. You know, when we come together, totally informal gatherings, and divide up what each person was going to write about and how we were going to get it published and distributed and so on. It was fun.
So how would you get them published? Where would you go to have them?
Well, you know, I didn't do that. I don't know who got the printing done, but somebody got the printing done. We just kind of divided up responsibilities among all of us to take them around and put them in places where people would find them and pick them up. And the administration, for one thing, they sent a mole from the administration to our editorial meetings. And it was so obvious that he was from Colin's office. I mean, just laughable. And so we'd have a meeting, and then when he was gone, we'd go ahead and do what we were really going to do. We'd see some diversion to get him out of the office, out of our meeting rooms, and then go ahead and do it. But they also sent people around to follow where we were distributing to pick them up so that nobody would see them. But we beat that too. We found ways of getting it out to where it cost us a little bit more, print more copies of it, but we got them out there.
So you distributed on campus? Did you distribute off campus as
Both
well?
on campus and off campus. You know, we knew where students were living off campus, and so we take them to those places and just get them out there.
Any involvement with the Wesley Foundation or the Methodist Student Center?
Yeah, they were very, very supportive. And you know, I wasn't a member of the Wesley Foundation, so people like Ron Stevens and others can tell you more about the specific role that they played. But yeah, they were very, very, very supportive.
Okay. Side note, Dr. Kahn was also a United Methodist.
I'm well aware. I used to see him at the church.
And attended First United Methodist Church.
Yeah.
The Wesley Foundation,
Yeah.
It was the Methodist Student Center
Yeah.
on the campus.
Yeah.
Okay. Were you aware of other similar kinds of publications, if not here, at other campuses?
Well, we
Would
knew
you-
about it at other campuses as part of what stimulated us to do it. You know, we knew that a lot of other universities had, quote, underground newspapers, so.
Would you share with them? Would you get copies of their papers?
Yeah.
Or how would you interact with
I
them?
can't remember if we did or not. I think somehow we did. I think some of the people in our group had contact with some people that I was not one of those people,
Okay.
but we were aware of others. I assume somebody know you did, though I can't say that specifically.
Okay. So you're involved with the was it the Forums Committee?
Forum committee, yeah.
Okay. Your primary objective was to bring in speakers,
Yeah.
outside speakers,
Right.
and make presentations on
Right.
campus. At some point, there's a university response to speakers, and they create a speakers policy.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, there was a policy before we got there, which basically said, and I can't quote it specifically, but no communists and no atheists. So, however that was worded, I don't know, but that was the policy, and COM was determined to enforce it totally, and we were determined to rip it down, and not because we were necessarily atheists or communists, we weren't. But because we're college students, we're supposed to be learning about things and learning about things from a different perspective, and to deny the student body the opportunity to hear and listen to and learn from these other perspectives is just plain wrong. So we were determined to change that, and over a period of time we did. During that period, kind of the 66, 67, is when we started really aggressively challenging it. It didn't get changed until a few years later. But and this is where the Wesley Foundation and others, you know, we would invite speakers to speak on campus, and the university would prevent it, and the Wesley Foundation would say, well, then we'll sponsor them. They can speak at our facility. Mm-hmm. So and after a while, we realized, well, if they're going to speak just off campus, then what's the point of the ban? And the fact that you're familiar with what happened with the sociology department?
Yes, and we can talk about that. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, again, I wasn't a sociology major, so I wasn't close to it, but I was certainly aware of it and knew a number of the people. But a number of things happened that really put pressure on Dr. Kahn and the administration. When you have almost the entire sociology department, which was a highly respected department.
All but one. The one person was on sabbatical.
That's right. They resigned en masse. It was national news, and it was a huge, huge embarrassment for Dr. Kahn, who had been Dean of Arts and Sciences, and here his stellar sociology department resigns in protest. These are tenured faculty giving up their tenured positions in protest of these policies. It was very powerful. And then AAUP came out with a report on it that was awfully critical of university policies, and those things put enough pressure on, and they began to realize the futility of it, and you know, what's wrong with students listening to a speaker who may have totally different opinions and positions. And of course, as we know today, the pressure is almost the other way around. It's the conservative speakers who are being denied the opportunity to speak on campus, and liberals who are trying to keep them from speaking, which outrages me. What do you mean? What do you mean Ann Coulter can't speak at Berkeley? Are you kidding me? Let her speak.
No.
Let her speak, and then engage in a dialogue and present the other side of it. But for God's sakes, don't deny her the right to speak. Give me a break.
the sociology department resigns. AAUP gets involved. That's the American Association of University College Professors, something like that. Are you familiar with any of the individuals there? Ted Agnew, Alexander Ospavat, Richard Cummins?
I knew them, met with them occasionally. We were just part of the cabal that was dealing with all these things. Didn't have classes with them, but knew them, and every now and then we would kind of gather and strategize on what we were doing, and knew them and admired them greatly.
Margaret Brooks?
Knew Dr. Brooks. She was a absolute hero in this whole thing. And as you may or may not be aware, we have established a fund in the name of Dr. Brooks and Dale Stockton to support the Difficult Dialogues program, which to the best of our knowledge does more than anybody else to continue the spirit of what we are all about. It wants to engage the students and faculty with speakers on difficult, challenging issues, which is what we were all about. And so we want to generate enough revenue to endow that program so that it will carry on in perpetuity.
Are you aware of some of the impacts that their involvement, like for Dr. Brooks, for example, that it had on their careers?
Ruined it for Dr. Brooks. No, in part, people respected what she had done, and so she was able to move on. But in terms of her career here at Oklahoma State, the administration just made her life absolutely miserable, and she finally just was forced out. And it was tragic because she was just a dear part of the campus. She loved this institution, loved the students, and did not want to leave. But they made her life absolutely miserable and forced her out.
Very similar to your first story about your football teammates.
That's right. Same kind of
different
tactics, circumstances, but yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thomas Altizer.
Yeah.
God is Dead.
Did
he speak on campus?
Well, no.
Was he invited?
Was he ever? Over and over and over again. And he's one of those that ended up speaking off campus, and it was part of what helped. I'll point out the utter stupidity and the folly of the policy, saying, if this guy can speak across the block from the campus, this is an academic institution, and he can't speak here. Mm-hmm. He was famous throughout the country. And his whole God is dead thing, he was not an atheist, and he wasn't saying God is dead. It was, granted, a provocative title, but that wasn't his point. And yet, just because he was identified with that title, they wouldn't let him speak.
Timothy Leary?
I don't know that we did much with Timothy Leary, at least not that I was involved with. And I wasn't all that, personally, and I think most of the people I was with weren't all that interested. We really weren't into the drug culture.
Right.
And so it just, give me a break. Who cares about you getting high on LSD? I don't care.
The impression I've had is his name was simply mentioned as kind of a provocative,
And it certainly came up, but we weren't willing to put our reputation on the line to try to bring Timothy Leary. Somebody else wanted to bring him, fine, but we weren't going to do it.
Adam Clayton Powell,
we certainly were interested in. Bringing Julian Bond was kind of our when I was chairman of the committee, our movement in that similar direction. And Powell, as you know, had some things other than just race relations in his reputation that were somewhat problematic. Mm-hmm. So, admired him in many ways, but also said, you're also kind of messing up your message with some of the things in your lifestyle. Right. So, whereas Julian Bond was just he was a super champion in every way.
What about Dick Gregory?
We didn't. He was on our list of possible speakers. Never really pushed that particularly. Okay. Maybe after I left, some people may have pushed for it. But
he did come later.
That's right.
And Stokely Carmichael?
Same thing. We were a little bit afraid that Carmichael would be too controversial and stir up too much animosity. And we weren't into creating animosity. We were simply trying to bring good speakers that people would listen to and learn something from to make our point, but not to be provocative so much in the way that Stokely Carmichael would.
Yeah, I think Stokely shows up in about 71 or 72.
Yeah.
Reverend Philip Berrigan.
good one to bring up. Again, he had not, by the time while I was doing it, he was just coming into prominence, was not yet a major prominent figure in the anti-war movement, but it was certainly on my list of awfully good people to be involved with. And I never got to meet the Berrigan brothers, but if you get to meet Coleman, Joe Gilchrist, Dan Berrigan testified at his trial as a character witness, and they worked very, very closely. And one of my very dear friends, I was supposed to have dinner with her the night before last, co-wrote a book with Dan Berrigan.
Okay.
So I don't know either of them, was never in their direct circle,
right.
But certainly held them in high regard and admire what they did.
Okay. Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, also names are mentioned.
Yeah, sure. And all of these names came up. We would just kind of go through our process. At least when I was chair of the committee, we didn't invite any of them, but certainly they were among the prospects, the possibility. Mm-hmm. And they were more on the academic freedom, the free speech side of things. Right. And certainly on the prospect list, we just didn't actively pursue those particular names.
And they did show up years later.
And it showed up later. That's right. After we finally got the gates opened and they were able to start bringing all these people that we would love to have been able to bring.
Okay. Are you familiar at all with something that was called Sexpo 68? Now, see, if you were here from
I was in the Peace Corps.
So that was your Peace Corps, so you hadn't come back yet.
I was in the Peace Corps 67 and 69. So,
okay.
Yeah, I heard some reference to it, but...
Okay. So you've talked about, you're aware of some of the pressures that Dr. Kalm felt really as the head of the institution. Where do you think that pressure was coming from in his world? Who was he trying to satisfy or appease? So the Board of Regents?
The state legislature, the governor, and the Board of Regents was very, very, very conservative. And as far as they were concerned, he should have kicked us all out of school and run us out of town. Did
newspapers throughout the state, the Daily Oklahoman, did they have any impact at all?
They did some. Not a whole lot of stories, but there were certainly some. And they weren't exactly embracing our student movement. They were kind of acknowledging it and acknowledging that it was part of what was going on around the country. But they certainly, I don't recall seeing an editorial in support of what we were doing.
Mm-hmm. Let me mention some personalities, and some of these we've talked about. If you'd like to add anything else about them. Abe Hesser, he was the director of the student union.
Yes, he certainly was.
What do you remember about?
He was certainly part of the Kalm team to try to squelch whatever he could. I didn't know him well, but knew him well enough to try to avoid him and just circumvent him and people like him who were trying to keep us from doing what we were doing.
Okay. Robert Kalm?
I got along very well with President Kalm. We disagreed dramatically, but I think there was a mutual respect, and I got to see him. I was brought back to the campus about 10 years ago to get an award, and we got together for lunch and had a very pleasant talk and kind of reflecting on those challenging times. But I respected the fact that he was president of the university and that he had pressures from the trustees and others. And that's part of the reason, and part of this came from Dr. Scales. He and I would talk about it, and he would say, I know you're young and vigorous and so on, but please understand that there is another point of view and respect that. We do need to bring about these changes, but they'll come about better if you do it respectfully than if you do it with burning down buildings and things like that. So we stayed, and by the way, my kids to this day are convinced that I was a hippie because I was part of the activist movement in the 60s. So of course I was a hippie. My hair was the same like then as it is now, and I was dressed more formally because I had a tie on. When I was a student on this campus, I wore a coat and tie and kept my hair short because I wanted to be taken seriously. If I had grown my hair long and become a hippie, it'd be too easy to just dismiss me as some radical, crazy hippie.
The stereotype would have
The
gotten in the way.
stereotype would have gotten in the way, and I did not want to let that happen. And that was true of our whole group. This whole group that's gathering this weekend, I don't think there was one of us that had long hair. Or smoked dope. There may have been some doing a little bit of dope, but we just didn't do that.
But you were more concerned with social issues regarding free speech, freedom of expression. Those
Civil rights was a part of it, but yeah, and we took the issues seriously. And if we're going to be effective in persuading people to change their mind, don't do things that are going to turn them off by your appearance. That's just stupid. If you want to be successful in changing policy, then you dress in a way and you speak in a way that people will listen to you. If you come in yelling and screaming and long hair and throwing things, then you give them the excuse to kick you out, and you accomplish nothing.
After Dr. Scales leaves, who taught you how to turn up the heat but not reach the boiling point, George Grease comes in, I believe, is the next dean. Any interactions with Dr. Grease at all?
Really. Okay. Not really. When I came back from my 1-year graduate school, I really just didn't. I got involved in the anti-war activities, but and worked very closely with Dale Stockton with the debate team and so on. But that's all I did during that time. Really didn't have any interaction at all with the dean's office.
Okay. I'm going to mention a few other names here, and you may or may not have William Hammonds.
No.
Okay. Frank McFarlane.
Some. I liked him, and his daughter was one of our classmates, and I liked him. Liked his daughter and liked him.
Was he with Dean of Men, or what was his role? He was with the administration.
Yeah, he might have been Dean of Students.
Dean of Students.
Might have been. Okay. I can't remember for sure. But he was one who was willing to meet with us and listen to us and showed respect for what we were doing. Didn't necessarily agree, but he was very respectful of us and willing to talk with us and work with us.
Okay. Our governor at the time was Dewey Bartlett.
Dewey Bartlett.
Any impressions?
Interestingly, he really didn't get involved with what we were doing here, but the one other activist thing that we did is we staged a big demonstration in support of funding for education, as the legislature was going to dramatically cut the budget for higher education, and we knew how to stage a demonstration, and we pulled off a big demonstration in support of funding for higher education. And this was the one time when the Daily Oklahoman came out in support of us, and I'll never forget, they had a big editorial cartoon that had an Oklahoman kind of busting the buttons on his vest, showing pride, and saying, "This is the way our students protest." And we were protesting for education, and they thought that was a pretty good thing.
So what are the keys to staging a good demonstration?
I'm not sure I'm the expert on that, but I've staged a few.
Okay.
In fact, I'll tell you about one in the Peace Corps. If we get into talk about the Peace Corps, I'll tell you about a demonstration.
Okay.
That you'll enjoy this little story.
Okay.
But I think number one, there has to be a worthy cause, something that people will, because what we did was totally organic. There was no leadership. There was, you say, who's in charge of this group that's gathering here? Nobody was in charge of it. Just some people had shared a similar passion and spread by word of mouth. We got together, and nobody called the meeting. Nobody was in charge of the meeting. We just got together and talked about it.
You didn't have email or smartphones?
No email, no smartphones. It was all word of mouth. And I don't think we ever sent letters to anybody. It was literally all word of mouth. But it has to start off with a cause that people are interested in and concerned about. And then you get the word out and you do it in a way that is appealing to people, that they'll feel that they want to be a part of it. And again, at least on this campus, had we turned violent or even extreme, I think we would have turned people off in a heartbeat, and it all would have collapsed. We did it with short hair, with neckties, and with respect, even with respect for Dr. Com. We did not call for his firing. We simply said, we just happen to disagree, and we want the opportunity to express our disagreement.
Good. Let's see. Some of these are your co-conspirators. Ken Doms.
Yep.
Just saw Ken again this morning.
Good guy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Bill Streck.
Bill
William
Streck,
Streck.
another one of the good guys. But again, just kind of part of this group that organically just kind of gravitated to one another. We didn't even know, most of us didn't even know each other. Some knew each other through the Wesley Foundation, or maybe they're sociology students. But people came from all different backgrounds and ended up finding each other somehow and came together. And most of us can't even remember who did what. We just did it.
Right.
Somebody did something, somebody else did something else, and we all know the names. And I was stayed with one of our colleagues last night. A couple of us stayed together near Tulsa. We were kind of saying, well, for example, Bill Streck. You remember Bill Streck? Well, what was his role? We're kind of, I can't remember for sure. I know he was there, and I knew he did a lot of good stuff, but I can't remember specifically what he did. And I'm sure people would say the exact same thing about me. I was chairman of the forum committee. That was kind of my main official capacity in doing this stuff. But you ask somebody, well, what did Chic do in all this? I don't know. I just knew he was there. He was part of it.
Well, and Doug Caves was involved with some kind of speakers program.
Yeah. He was on the forum committee.
Okay, so he was on the forum committee.
He was on the committee that I was chairman of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then Ron Stevens was really kind of the editor for the drummer.
Yeah. I think he was, to the extent that anybody was a prime figure on anything that we were doing, Ron and the drummer would certainly come together.
Okay. Was there any affiliation? We talked about, was there any affiliation with other organizations off campus in other states? I mean, were there ever any kind of larger connections?
Very little. We knew some of the people doing similar things at OU and had a little bit of telephone interaction with them. So, they kind of knew what we were doing, and we sort of knew what they were doing, but very, very little. Because I came from Ohio State, my father on the faculty there, I kind of got in touch with some people there to find out what they were doing and exchange some ideas. But back then, that kind of communication, as you may recall, a long distance phone call in the 60s was a big deal. Mm-hmm. A big deal. And, you just didn't make long distance phone calls.
Right. And you were so, you said word of mouth, you were so locally, so oral and how things were being transmitted. Were there any lawsuits or any other kind of legal activity?
There was some after I left, and I can't tell you even who it was that did it, but Keith McGlamory is here, and he and I flew in together from Washington, and he's a lawyer, and was aware of and connected with some people who did file lawsuits about what we call the gag rule and a few other things. But I wasn't directly involved in any of the legal activity. I knew about it, people talked about it, but it just wasn't something that I personally got involved with.
Okay. So you mentioned your involvement kind of started in two ways. Part of it was anti-Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
You began to realize some of the challenges in that war. But you also mentioned your first story about
Civil rights.
Civil rights. So how does civil rights play into this? What interaction is there now with black students?
It was largely the same set of students. There was some difference, but to a large extent, it was the very same set of students and the same methodology. That is just word of mouth and get word out to people who might share our interest in this set of issues. So very much same set of people got involved in civil rights, got involved in the academic freedom of speech issues, and got involved in the anti-war activities. And then we're not doing anything about the environmental movement here with this group, but starting in 1970 with the first Earth Day, there was a big demonstration
April 1970.
That's right. And there was indeed the beginning of a movement, and you look at the people in the room, and it's the same people. Not totally. We brought in some others, but to a large extent, it was the same people.
Okay. Were there African American students or black students?
Yes. Yes.
And who were some of those leaders?
Well, Harold Fields is here, and he was very much a part of it. And his primary focus was indeed civil rights, and he'll be telling his story on Saturday night when we have our dinner at the Hideaway. He and Keith McGlamory took a trip through the Deep South and barely survived it, and very much a part throughout his career of the Civil Rights Movement. Melvin Wade is here. You've met Melvin.
Well, and I'll be interviewing him after we're finished.
So he was very much a part of both the Civil Rights Movement and the academic freedom and all of the other things. Trying to think who else. Oh, there was a faculty member who was coming. Earl Mitchell is his name, the first African American to be fully recognized
And granted tenure.
And I knew him back then and admired him greatly. And I'm so excited that he's coming. He was the last one to register. He only registered about 3 days ago, long past the deadline. He sent me an email, says, am I too late? He said, not. Anybody else would be too late, but you're not.
And he retired here as a maritime.
Yeah, I know that. Good man. I really admired him.
Is Bernice coming with him?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I can't know for sure. If I don't think so.
Okay. Wonderful couple.
Good man. Yeah.
We involved in any residence hall issues. At the beginning of your time period, and maybe even further, but there were different rules for men and women.
Oh, were there ever?
So was your group involved in those?
Several of the people who were here really got their start in being activists around those issues, not so much the others. Once they became activists, they were ready to become activists in other things, but that was the first thing with regard to, for them. I was a guy on the football team, and so what? It just, as far as I knew at the time, that's just the way things are, and nothing you can do about it. But boy, there were several of the women who were just furious. And later, as I thought about it, I said, well, yeah, they're right. That's just totally wrong that they are treated differently than the men. So yes, there was a movement, and again, successful. The rules, after a while, the rules started to ease up and started to change.
It was quite a period of transition on a number of fronts. So Kent State, is that in 69?
Spring of 70, I believe.
So are you back here in graduate school then?
I was back here when it happened. Yeah.
But you do have a connection to Ohio. Any response locally to Kent State?
The word certainly spread on campus and within our group very quickly, and we kind of gathered together and did not a formal memorial, but we just kind of were a group mourning for what had happened and energizing and saying, damn it, they can't get away with this. It just plain wrong, and it gave us more of a sense of solidarity with the whole national movement. We had that already, but that just helped galvanize the whole student movement, saying we're all in this together. And they come after students like that, by God, we can't let them get away with it.
Personally, I think that was an incident where you may have had separate organizations throughout the nation who really didn't have much contact with each other. That was a catalyst for them beginning to explore how they connect. And so, a name I forgot to mention early on, a speaker who was proposed to come here, John Kenneth Galbraith. Are you familiar with that situation?
And he wrote a letter saying the reason he wouldn't come was because of the policies, which we were very proud of. We'd love to have had him come as a speaker, but it was even better to him say, well, I don't want to come to a campus where they have these ridiculous rules.
I have the letter in a folder.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
So,
yep.
Okay. I forgot to mention that. Because Galbraith, in response to leaders within the student and activist community, and after being informed of the policy, he responds that he would attend once the policy was changed.
That's right.
Okay. So, if we could step back, what do you think were the causes for this period of conflict and dissent? What builds to lead us to this point where now there are all these issues that are on the stove?
I think I kind of put it in a broad national, even global context. There was just a convergence of factors we had come through the Depression, we had come through World War II, we had come through Korea, and then we had this tranquil, what is people think of as a tranquil period in the late 50s, Eisenhower and so on, and the country was just kind of healing the wounds from all of that and recovering economically and so on, and all well and good. But the fact that things were going well also gave people an opportunity then to step back and say, but I think there's some things wrong too. This is a great country, but the big but started to come up. But equality, we are not. We claim to be a country of equality. We are not. So that the civil rights movement started to take hold. And then the academic freedom thing was, it didn't start here, I don't know if it even started at Berkeley, but Berkeley certainly drew attention to it. We were very well aware of that. And wait a second, they think they got problems at Berkeley? Come to Stillwater. We can show you problems with academic freedom. So that one caught hold. And then, of course, the war in Vietnam came along, and early on in it, I was among those who said, we got to go kill the commies. That's got to stop the spread of communism. And
was there a draft at that point?
Oh, yes.
Had you registered for the draft?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And early on, I was ready to drop out of school and go put on a uniform and go fight. But it was that experience with the debate team where it did research into it and discovered that the Gulf of Tonkin was totally fabricated. And that was known early on. If you did any research at all, you found out that was fabricated. And then you read Bernard Fall and other people like that and said, wait a second. The Vietnamese people are not fighting against the United States. They're not even fighting for communism. They're fighting for their own freedom and their own independence. That's what they're fighting for, and we're sending hundreds of thousands of soldiers over to conquer them on their territory when they're fighting for their own independence. That's just plain wrong. How can we possibly do that? And as far as I was concerned with regard to the draft, I was not about to submit to the draft. I was lucky that old shoulder injury from playing football. The Peace Corps doctor wrote a letter saying this guy's injury is too severe for him to be able to serve in the military. So I went for my draft physical and showed them the letter, and they kind of looked at it with disgust and said, "You're 1Y." So I got my 1Y deferment.
And wasn't Peace Corps, couldn't it also be used as a deferment at that time?
For that 2 years. So
right,
when I came back, though, the war was still going on. And that's when I was called up for the physical.
Okay. So then you showed the letter.
I showed him the letter,
yeah. You would have been on campus in the fall of 1963 with the assassination of President Kennedy in November. What kind of response was there on campus?
Actually, fall of '63 is when I was at Ohio Wesleyan.
So you've been here the year before, and then
before, but I was at Ohio Wesleyan for '63, so I can't tell you what.
Okay.
I can tell you what it was like there. It was devastating. It was just total shock throughout. I would like to think it was the same thing here, but the Kennedys were never all that popular in Oklahoma, so there may have been some people just saying, he got what he deserved, but I hope that's not the case, but you'll have to ask other people.
There was a memorial service that was held in front of the library,
sure it was.
and it was a very somber and well attended.
Everywhere throughout the country and throughout the world.
Do you think that was a possible point where people thought maybe things aren't as good as we thought?
I think so. That and then you had the other assassinations, and then you had the riots and so on. And so things there was a growing reality that yes, it's a great country. We're proud of the country, but we have not yet reached perfection. We've got a long ways to go, and here are some of the issues that are troubling. And now that we've become prosperous enough, we can afford to address some of these things.
So do you feel that what was going on here mirrored other campuses around, even though
it was certainly influenced by other campuses? Mirrored may or may not be the right term, but it comes close to it. We certainly read the newspapers and magazines and knew what was going on in other campuses and learned from it and applied some of those same concepts and the same spirit certainly caught on here.
Have you ever heard that some of the hedging that was planted along sidewalks was used as a crowd control mechanism?
I had not heard that, but I'm not at all surprised.
Okay.
And you probably heard about our picnics that we did on the lawn.
So the lawn area to the south of the library is kind of considered a sacred space in such that there were probably no building placed in that whole area all the way down to University Avenue. But it is a space that could be reserved by groups. As I said, the Kennedy Memorial was held there. President Combs' inaugural was held on that lawn. And so talk about that space, if you wouldn't mind.
But and as I recall, there may or may not have been any specific rules prohibiting you from going there. It was just everybody considered it to be sacred. Now, there may have even been rules, but it was certainly sacred ground, and we were out to challenge almost anything that was sacred, just to make a point. And so we just started, and again, it was totally word of mouth. We just started gathering to have a picnic lunch on the lawn. What's wrong with students having a picnic lunch on the lawn? Why can't we do that? And we just did it. And one of the really amusing things, back in those days, as you'll recall, cameras were these big black cameras with the bellows and so on, not this discreet stuff that you have now. The whatever authority they were coming from came out with those big cameras taking our pictures. Good God. If you want to know who I am and that I'm involved with this, I'll tell you who I am. You don't have to take my picture. It was downright comical.
It's hard to be subtle with those cameras. So you meet on the lawns.
It was just kind of a social gathering. We would talk about whatever the next protest movement might be, but mostly it was just a way for our group of people that are coming here this weekend to gather socially and enjoy one another's company.
Did you adopt a name?
We did. We called them the Provo Picnics.
Provo Picnics.
And I'm not sure anybody remembers specifically the source of that. I'm thinking it was to be provocative.
So where did the FATAGS come from?
That's different.
Okay.
So we had the picnics were called Provo Picnics.
Okay.
The organization itself, nobody's even sure how to pronounce it. FATAGS, I don't know. But that came about, and it might have been Ron. I don't recall for sure who it was. But we kind of talked about getting organized as an official campus student organization. But there's no way they were going to approve us as an official campus organization for what we were doing. Somebody found out about an organization that had been chartered, had been recognized as an official organization that was dormant, was no longer active. There was nobody involved with it, but they were still on the books as an official student organization. So we adopted it. Started calling us the FATAGS, and it was perfect because we said, we're the Friday Afternoon Teen Glee Society. We get together on Friday afternoon and drink tea and have a good time. What's wrong with that? And of course, totally flippant and facetious and kind of snubbing our noses at the whole system. And so that's how that came about.
But you were an officially authorized organization?
That's right. And they had no basis for dismembering us. So
yeah, and it wasn't the Cowboy Communist Club.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Did you feel, you mentioned that there was a mole in the drummer gatherings and that there was these photographers. Do you think there was other surveillance going on?
Yeah.
What kind of surveillance do you think was occurring?
We certainly had every reason to believe that other meetings that we had, not just the drummer, but other rally events that we were planning, that there was somebody there. And more often than not, we even knew who it was. Probably not always. They may have been more successful at getting some people who could actually pull it off, but we had every reason to believe. But what we were doing was stuff that was certainly not violent, and was under any normal circumstances of free speech, freedom of assembly would be considered totally legal and legitimate. So how are you going to deny us the right to do these things?
Did you ever experience or feel any kind of threat or violence during any of these activities?
No, never. We were, and we read about the violence going on in other places. And we kind of said, why would you do that? it's counterproductive. It's wrong to go violent in the first place. And in the second place, it's counterproductive. It gives your opponents a reason to criticize you and shut you down. Don't go violent. And we didn't even come remotely close to doing anything violent.
You think that the Board of Regents and maybe Dr. Kamm had a fear of potential violence?
Yeah, they read about stuff going on elsewhere, and yeah, I think they were scared to death we were going to turn violent.
Let's see. So you come to OSU from 62 to 63, spring of 63. Then Ohio Wesleyan 63.
Fall of 62 was my first year.
The spring of 63.
Spring of 63. Then Ohio
Fall
Wesleyan,
of 63.
Spring of 64. Came back, fall of 64.
And then graduated in 67.
Yeah, I actually had enough credits in December of 66 to graduate, but I kind of identified with the class of 67. And so I wanted to graduate with my, in fact, I was just describing this to Keith and when we were coming in, said I identified, my football identity was the class that graduated in 66. My activist identity is the class that graduated in 67. I identify with the activists, so I consider myself class of 67.
You joined the Peace Corps. 2 years in the Peace Corps.
2 years in Columbia in the Peace Corps.
Columbia. What was your job in?
I was a community development volunteer, where they drop you in a village and say, figure out what to do and come back in 2 years and tell us what you did. Hopefully it was good.
What kind of training did you have before they dropped you in the village?
Well, you just opened the door for a little story that I'm sure you will enjoy.
Okay, let's save that if you wouldn't mind. We'll save that because I want to finish up our OSU time and I want to get back.
Okay.
So then after your 2 years in Columbia, then you returned to OSU to work on a master's degree.
Master's degree in speech communications, mostly because of Dale Stockton.
And then with his passing in 70,
what's the point?
You leave.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's return to Columbia. And I want to hear about
the Peace Corps. So I went into the Peace Corps. A whole bunch of us went into the Peace Corps out of our activist group. It was just, people say, "Why did you join the Peace Corps?" I said, "Why not?" It's just, I don't remember even making a decision. Of course, I'm going to go to school, then I'll go to the Peace Corps, and then do whatever I'll do after that. So I went into the Peace Corps. It was originally accepted to go to Micronesia, and then that got changed to Ethiopia, and then that got changed to Colombia. That's just the way things were at the Peace Corps in those days. So I went to Colombia, and I was in training. We did our first half of our training in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Training up until then had all been done in the United States, and then you went overseas, and they were going through a transition to in-country training. So ours was one of the few groups where we did first half in the U.S., then went down to Bogota for the rest of it. In Bogota, the director of the training program was head of a consortium of universities. He had gotten the contract to essentially host the training, and he was awful. The trainers were fabulous, but this guy was just awful. We couldn't stand him. And with about 3 weeks to go in the training program, we got word that he was trying to deselect. Remember the term deselection? Mm-hmm. He wanted to deselect a married couple that was in our group, Joe and Sarah Walsh, and we were furious. Now, we loved Joe and Sarah, and the trainers liked Joe and Sarah. So, and one of the trainers in particular, a guy named Sam Farr, went over this guy's head to the Peace Corps country director and objected to this guy trying to deselect him. So Sam was fired, along with some of the other trainers. As soon as we got word that we loved Sam and the other trainers, we went on strike. And as far as we know, and I know every single Peace Corps director, one of the few people, every director from Sarge up through Kerry Hessler-Randa, know every one of them, good friends with most of them. And I've asked them, was there a strike during your period? Are you kidding? So as far as we know, the only time in the history of the Peace Corps the trainees ever went on strike was our strike in Bogota. And guess who the strike leader was? The guy from Oklahoma State who had been leading demonstrations. Mm-hmm. So they elected me to head up the strike team. So we went on strike, and we had 45 trainees. We said we got to have 100% participation. If anybody breaks ranks, we're dead, and they'll kick the rest of us out. But we have to have 100% participation, and we did, every single one, knowing they were risking the possibility of being sent home. Right. So we refused to go to training. Sam and the other trainers set up an alternative place for us to meet, and so they could keep on training us, and they so appreciated what we were doing. Word got up to Washington. Jack Vaughn was director of the Peace Corps at the time. Flew down to Bogota to find out what the hell is going on. Trainees on strike? Are you kidding me? So we met with Dr. Martin, the head of the program, met with Sam and the trainers who had been fired, and met with our little leadership group for our strike. And I'll never forget, not if you ever knew Jack Vaughn. He and I became very close friends over the years. But he came down, and he has a way of just getting a little twinkle in his eye and a grin on his face. And after we had talked a little while, he got that twinkle in his eye and his grin on his face. And he said, get everybody together. So we had a way of getting word out to everybody, and everybody came together and said, I'm impressed. If you guys can pull this off, you don't need more training. You already know what to do. And he swore us in. We're supposed to have 2 more weeks of training. He swore us in and said, go out to your sites, your Peace Corps volunteers.
You had enough theory and you were putting it into practice.
Put it into practice, yeah. So that's what we did.
Were you all community development
Yeah,
specialists
the
then?
whole group was community development. Fast forward, Sam Farr became a member of Congress. Member of the U.S. Congress. And he and I remained friends over the years. And another very personal part of that story is in 1992, I went to Washington as head of the National Peace Corps Association, the organization of Peace Corps people. Great privilege to do that. And Sam, in that year, got elected to Congress. So here we were back in Washington. So we'd get together and so on. But I had a personal challenge. Our youngest son was born with kidney failure. He's had 3 transplants. And we discovered the fallacy of U.S. health insurance. We thought we had insurance until we started to need something covered, and we found that tens of thousands of dollars a month in bills were not being covered by insurance. And I was just fast-tracked to total bankruptcy. And Sam knew about it. And he kept saying, we want to help you. We want to raise the money to cover your medical expenses. And I kept saying, no, there are other people with greater needs than mine. You know, it's my responsibility. We'll take care of it. Finally, one night, late on a Friday night, phone rang in my office, and it was Sam. And he said, all right, he said, you spent your whole life doing things to help other people. He said, when you do that, you expect them to accept it and appreciate it. That we're going to help you, and it's time for you to accept it and appreciate it. What can I say? So Sam and Maureen Orth and Steve Werner organized a fundraising campaign, and Maureen Orth is Tim Russert's widow, Peace Corps Columbia. And Steve Werner happens to be Vince Lombardi's nephew. And so they all were in a position to do things that were very helpful. So among the 3 of them, they raised the money to pay our medical bills.
Another wonderful story.
Another wonderful story.
Chic, you've got a few of them.
Oh, I've got a lot of them.
Okay.
Just getting started.
All right. So, what did you do after leaving Oklahoma State University?
Well, I went to the Peace Corps, of course.
All right.
Fabulous experience. Community development volunteer on the Caribbean coast of Colombia. Built a school and organized a fishing co-op. And the fishermen were using dynamite, and they were losing their arms and killing the fish population. So by getting a co-op, they were able to get loans to get better nets and motors for their boats, and a viable alternative to the dynamite. So I'm proud of doing that. For the school, I could have written home for the money to pay for the materials to build the school. It wouldn't have cost all that much. But I didn't want to do it that way. I wanted the community itself to build the school. And we found 4 molds for cement blocks. We were right on the coast, so we had plenty of sand.
Okay.
And the few people in the community that had jobs usually worked construction. And somehow, bags of cement would show up every now and then. I didn't ask how they got there, but bags of cement would show up, and at the rate of 4 cinder blocks a day, we made the blocks to build a school. They made the blocks to build a school. It was theirs. I was just the catalyst. But they built the school at the rate of 4 blocks a day, and finally it took a year and a half, but when that school was finally built, we went to the Department of Education and said, we've got a school, you have an obligation to provide teachers, and they provided teachers. So a point of great pride to have done that. So that's what I did in the Peace Corps.
Okay. After your Peace Corps, you returned here, and then in 1970?
1970.
Where do you head off at that point?
I went up to Kansas, El Dorado, Kansas, to run a community action agency. Great experience. We did some good stuff. And then I kind of meandered through a number of things, all nonprofit organizations, all social cause kinds of things, but also returned to my athletic interests and became a kayak racer, marathon runner, but kayak racer, and I did well. Raced nationally and internationally, and got a drawer full of national championship medals.
Shoulder didn't impact your kayak?
Well, it did. In fact, I would like to think that if it weren't for the shoulder, I would have made the Olympic team. And I probably would have. I was good. I was good. And among in the top 10 in the country. And trained really, really hard and overcame, to compensate for the weak shoulder. And thoroughly enjoyed it. Close friendship with some of the best athletes. The godfather of our youngest son has 2 Olympic gold medals, and we're very close friends and enjoying one another's company. So I got to train and race with these extraordinary people and travel the world. And then became chairman of the board of the U.S. Canoe and Kayak Team, president of the Pan American Canoe Racing Council, on the board of the International Canoe Federation, on the board of the U.S. Olympic Committee. That was kind of neat to do that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So did that for several years. It didn't pay, in fact, it cost me money to do it, but I had other jobs, that supplemented what I was doing. Also worked in the arts and became the founding director of something that was then called the National Assembly of Local Arts Agencies, all the arts councils in the country. They hired me to be their founding executive director. The organization is now called Americans for the Arts. If you listen to National Public Radio, you hear announcements of them, Americans for the Arts, being a major sponsor of NPR. And that's the organization that I was the founding director of. So I love hearing that announcement on the radio every day on my way to and from wherever I'm going. So I did that. But then ended up getting invited to provide leadership for the National Peace Corps Association, the organization of people that served in the Peace Corps. But I was troubled that it really wasn't doing anything. It was just kind of a database for people that had served in the Peace Corps. We published a nice magazine called Worldview, and a little bit of advocacy on behalf of the Peace Corps, but just didn't do much. I said, damn it, we're Peace Corps people. We need to do something. So we started energizing the community to do things. Developed a global education program. 30% of returned Peace Corps volunteers are teachers. Third goal of Peace Corps is supposed to bring the world back home. If you're a teacher, you ought to be bringing the world back to your classroom, but they weren't getting any support for that. So we developed a support mechanism to help return volunteers who are teachers to bring a global perspective to their classrooms. Regardless of what you're teaching, there are ways of incorporating that global perspective. So we developed that. But the thing that bothered me the most was the Peace Corps has the word peace in it, but doesn't do much directly about peace. One could say building good relationships and community development and so on is helpful, but there's a lot more to building peace than what we did in the Peace Corps. And there are reasons the Peace Corps doesn't get directly involved in conflict resolution, because then you get into a political realm and the Peace Corps just can't do that. Right. But former Peace Corps volunteers can. There are no restrictions on us and what we can do, and we know the language, we know the culture, and we're motivated to do this kind of thing. And a lot of people come back and develop careers and skills that can be extremely valuable to help bring an end to violence or prevent the outbreak of violence. So when the genocide broke out in Rwanda, we mobilized, organized people who'd served in Rwanda in that area to go back and help deal with the genocide and help restore safety, stability, and security in Rwanda, and did an awfully good job of it. And we're very proud of what we did. And that and the Friends of Liberia group had also done terrific work in Liberia to help deal with the violence there. So between those two initiatives, we then latched on to the idea of mobilizing returned Peace Corps volunteers to deal with conflict and violence prevention around the world. And then in 1992, I had just left the National Peace Corps Association. I was exhausted and I was broke. So I got a job that paid a lot of money and I didn't have to do any work. So that was a good deal. But I got a phone call from my friend John Garamendi. John had been Peace Corps volunteer in Ethiopia, had become Deputy Secretary of Interior in the Clinton administration. We were good friends. By the way, he was an All-American football player at Cal, while I was a less than mediocre player here. And John turned down a contract with the Dallas Cowboys to go to the Peace Corps. But we've become really, really good friends. And he called and said, "Chick, my friends are killing each other." And he was talking about the Ethiopia-Eritrea border war. And he said, "We've got to do something about it." I said, "John, I don't have a clue what we can do, but let's give it a try." So we got together, kind of talked about it, and contacted the two embassies and offered our services if they felt it would be helpful. If they didn't want us involved, we were not going to get involved. They said, "Please help. We respect the Peace Corps." Both the ambassadors had been taught by Peace Corps volunteers. The heads of state of the two countries had been taught by Peace Corps volunteers. So we met with them, and it's kind of a long story that I won't go into. You buy my book and you get the whole story.
Okay. Well, you sent me a copy, but
that's right. Well, you can read it's To End a War and then To End Another War, because there are two chapters about ending these wars. So what we did is what I learned from Dr. Han Su-Yin and what I learned from Dale Stockton was to listen. And nobody else was doing that. Susan Rice was deeply involved in it, and she screwed it up big time. And I don't mind saying that and saying it on camera. It's true. She screwed it up big time because she came in saying, "Here's what you foolish people need to do." And the United States wanted Ethiopia to beat up Eritrea, so we were on Ethiopia's side. We were on the side of peace. We were on Ethiopia's side. And our group was not. We were purely 100% on the side of peace. And so it took a while to build that trust with them, but we did. And they ended up inviting us to Asmara and Addis Ababa to meet with the heads of state. And when we went over, we thought, well, in Asmara, we'll get 2 minutes with President Sayas, and then he'll send us off with somebody. He spent 3 hours with us. And we started working through the issues and finding resolutions to the multiple issues. And he was willing to make concessions. And we said, we're on our way to Addis Ababa. Can we say this to your adversary, al-Sanawi? He said, absolutely. So we clarified each of the points that he was willing to make concessions on. Flew down to Addis. Again, not sure if we would get any time at all with the Prime Minister. Got 2.5 hours with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. And we started going down the list. He's saying, Sayas will never compromise. All he wants is to fight a war. I said, well, he's willing to do this on this issue. Here's what he's willing to do. And he kind of said, really? And we said, he gave us specific authority to say that's what he's willing to do. So we went down the list and got almost to the end. There was one last issue. I won't go into the details of what it was, but we were down to one last issue, keeping those two countries at war. We tried and tried and tried, going back and forth to end that issue, and the war would have been over. Weren't able to do it, but we were close. Another year of fighting went on, and finally, John and I called Sayas Afwerki, the president of Eritrea, and said, we're down to, it narrowed down even further. It was just one side or the other has to make a concession on this issue. He said, will you do it? And he was reluctant, but he finally said yes. And I jumped into a cab at the Ethiopian embassy and said, let's go with this one more time. You've told me that if Sayas is willing to make this concession, the war will be over. Is that right? He said, yes, it's right, but he'll never do it. All he wants to do is fight. I said, I know how you feel. We've been through this many times. But I'm here to tell you he just did. And I was meeting with the Deputy Chief of Mission, the ambassador was out of town, so with the DCM. And he said, I can't believe you. I said, have I ever told you anything that wasn't true? He said, no. He said, I can't believe you. So I pulled out my cell phone. I said, got him on speed dial. I'll call him. He says, you can't do that. There was a total prohibition, any communication between the two embassies on anything. I said, okay, I know the rules. Please tell the Prime Minister what I just told you. 2 weeks later, Prime Minister Melo Salami was in Washington, invited John and me to have breakfast with him. And over breakfast, before we even started the meal, he leaned forward and said, I want you to know the war's over, and I want to thank you for making it happen. A couple of Peace Corps guys.
Did you know that Oklahoma State University had a campus
in
Ethiopia?
I know a lot about it.
Okay.
And they
would have been active during the years you were here.
You bet.
Oh.
Yeah. No, and I made sure that they knew about my Oklahoma State connection. In fact, Eritrea's ambassador to the U.S. was a student here. So he and I enjoyed reflections on our times here at Oklahoma State. So we did that. The real for me, the emotional capstone to all of that was about 2 months after we were invited to the treaty signing ceremonies in Algiers. And after that, we got a letter from Melis thanking us for creating the spirit and the momentum that made that achievement possible. So about 2 months after that, I went to buy a hot dog at the kiosk at the corner of 18th and L in Washington. And almost all the hot dog vendors in Washington are from Ethiopia and Eritrea. So I stopped to buy a hot dog, and I thought the vendor was probably from Eritrea, so I asked him, "Where are you from?" She said, "Eritrea." I said, "I thought so." I said, I know your president is saying it's FATAGS. And she kind of glared at me like, who's ever heard of Eritrea, let alone knows the name of it, knows the president of the country. She just glared at me and said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm Chic Dambach." "I know you. I know who you are. You brought peace to my country." Hot dog vendor, knew everything we had done. They'd been following it in the newspapers. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, was the total validation of the importance of what we had done.
I've got one last question
All
for
right.
you. And then if you
Pardon
have
me for
anything,
going on.
Oh, no. And if there's anything else you want to add to
Yeah.
it, but what I'm looking for is how did the events and experiences you had while you were a student here impact the rest of your life?
Totally.
So in what way?
Well, when I came here, for one thing, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. I kind of envisioned myself playing a few years of football here and becoming a coach and a teacher, and not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, that would be a perfectly noble and worthwhile thing to do. But zero interest in social causes of any kind whatsoever. And because of what I experienced here, because of what happened with Earl, because of what happened with the free speech movement, because of what happened with the anti-war movement, and the fact that I could become a part of it. I often reflect on this. If I'd been at any of a number of schools where these movements were enormous, and almost everybody's a part of it, I would have just been caught up in one of many, and it wouldn't have meant that much to me. Here, it was a small group of really dedicated people who had to overcome a university that wasn't particularly welcoming of this kind of thing. So that gave us all the more intensity to what we were doing. And because of that, and then the Peace Corps experience, and because of Dale Stockton and his commitment to moral issues and to social justice, that set me on this path. And from then on, I just had to spend my life doing this kind of thing.
Anything else you want to add, Chic?
Yeah, I'll add one small thing, and then I've got to get over this difficult dialogues program.
Okay.
Among the people I got to work with later on is Peter Yara of Peter, Paul, and Mary. Mm-hmm. And as you probably know, a true champion of social justice and all of this kind of thing. Peter and I become extremely close friends. In fact, I'm working with him now. While we've been talking, I've probably gotten 3 emails from him. But Peter has a song called "Sweet Survivor" that was written for those of us who were part of the activist movement in the 60s, and then years later kind of wearing out and seeing, gee, did we really accomplish anything? The song "Sweet Survivor" says, "Carry on, my sweet survivor, carry on, my lonely friend. Don't give up on the dream. Don't you let it end. For everything that matters, carry on." And that is what we're trying to do, is carry on.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay.
Pardon me for getting emotional,
No,
but
that's,
I get emotional about this stuff.
you know, if we don't feel things,
Yeah.
there's
Why bother?
Okay. I think that concludes what my
All
questions are, and I appreciate your time.